Shakespeare's birth town of Stratford-upon-Avon has buckled to pressure to change its exhibits so that it is more inclusive and diverse. Is that a good thing? This is Bev Turner for GBN Originals, and I'm just going to reflect a little bit on a conversation that we had on Britain's Newsroom this morning. We're going to play it you in just a minute, and it's the idea that Shakespeare shouldn't be perceived as all good, and that period in time when the UK was doing a fantastic job, frankly, of going around the world, bringing sanitation, money, education, religion to far-flung corners of the world, should be treated with a little derision. Exhibits will be changed in Shakespeare's hometown of Stratford-upon-Avon. If you haven't been, you should go. It's fabulous, and you should probably go before they make it all go a little bit super woke and undermine the brilliance of that writer and accept that it was a different period in time. We had a conversation on the show with Femi Nylander and Rafe Heydel-Mankoo, the historian, to talk about whether Shakespeare needs to be reframed for a modern audience, particularly in Stratford-upon-Avon. And Femi has a point here. I understand his frustration that most of us can't name an African writer, but we can guarantee that in Africa, Shakespeare is a name known by probably the majority of people as having been one of the most successful poet, playwright and writer throughout history. But how do we fix that? Does it even need to be fixed is the question. Cultural relativity. Are we always meant to see that the Western view of the world is better than maybe an African view of the world? It is a really complex issue, but you have to watch to the end of this interview to see the punchline as to why this might actually be happening. We're going to be talking about the Shakespeare story in a minute, because we've been saying all morning that Shakespeare is going to be decolonised. And what that actually means, because it can be quite difficult to understand what that means, it means that the exhibitions that they have in Stratford-upon-Avon, have you been and done the tour? Well, of an open-top bus tour. I did the open-top bus tour, been in Anne Hathaway's house. Apparently, some researchers have come in and said, it's all very colonial in here. We need to point out that colonialism was not all good, and that the impact of colonialism on world history is bad, and that Shakespeare's work has played a part in that. In other words, let's not celebrate our wonderful English bard, the most brilliant writer.
Well, it has to be probably the most famous writer
in the world
ever.
And
his works are still being performed 500 years later.
Yeah, that's right.
Basic part of school syllabus.
So this is the Shakespeare Birth Trust have basically announced that it's going to, as I say, decolonise these vast museum collections. They said that Shakespeare's legacy has been hijacked to further white supremacy.
Us blokes hate talking about a little thinning up top, and many of us settle with that balding look, but that wasn't for me, and that's why I went to Elite Hair, the world's leading hair loss clinic, and now I've had over 4,000 new hairs added to this barnet, and very soon I'm going to be rocking some brand new flowing locks, and you can too. So how does it work? Step 1, I sent the team a set of photos of my head. Step 2, I then spoke to one of the Elite Hair staff who looked through my photo submissions and worked out a treatment plan for me. Step 3, Elite Hair then organised accommodation and the treatment. I was at their state-of-the-art treatment centre in Istanbul, and their incredibly kind staff took me through the process, and before I knew it, I was in surgery. Elite Hair and their leading medical experts have specialised in pain-free treatments using the sleep deep method, and they really mean that. I felt incredibly relaxed the whole time, and I haven't felt any pain since. Check out Elite Hair using the link in the description. When you do, Elite Hair will provide you with a free personalised hair analysis. Then you'll join over 100,000 happy patients. Hit that link and start your hair growth journey like I did today.
We're going to join now the journalist and filmmaker Femi Nylander and broadcasting historian Rafe Heydel-Mankoo, who is obviously very well known to this programme. Can we talk to you first, Femi? Is this long overdue, this apparent need to decolonise the museum in Shakespeare's birthplace?
Hi, Andrew. Can you name me 3 African authors?
Can I make you what?
Can you name me 3 African authors? Do you know the names of 3 African authors?
I'm struggling.
However, However,
can't name one,
if we
can you?
lived,
You can't even name one. So this is the point. This is the clear point.
But if we lived in Africa,
you're going to twist this.
But if we lived in Africa, we could absolutely. If we were African, we could absolutely name three African
everyone in Africa.
authors.
I can tell you now, many people in Africa know the name Shakespeare. This is the whole point of what we mean when we talk about cultural colonialism. The idea that throughout the whole world, certain people are celebrated as the best of the best. I don't think Shakespeare's a white supremacist. No one has said Shakespeare's a white supremacist. What people have said is the works of Shakespeare, etc., are celebrated as, and English works in general. If you go to study English literature at Oxford University, the literature in the English language is what English literature is supposed to mean. But what it means at Oxford University is it means Virginia Woolf and Shakespeare and Charles Dickens and English people, and that's fine. But the reality is that because England had an empire, the English language is a global language, and you have writers like Chinua Achebe. Right, you have writers like Chimamanda Adichie. You have these people. You have people writing in English in all these languages. You also have people who've written amazing works of literature in Arabic, which can be translated to English. Amazing works of literature elsewhere. I don't think anyone is saying Shakespeare was a white supremacist. I played Othello at Christ Church Cathedral Gardens when I was at Oxford University. I played in Romeo and Juliet at the Orange Tree Theatre as an actor. I've done Shakespeare, and I'm not. I don't see many things. I mean, Othello is not a character that's written as an idiot. He's not a character that's written as a barbarian. He's a character that's written as a tragic person who eventually takes his own life because of jealousy. It's a complex character. No one has said that Shakespeare is a racist. People have said that the fact that Andrew can sit here and not know the name of a single African author, one of the whole continents, and yet most people throughout the world can name Shakespeare, is to do with cultural colonialism and the fact that we celebrate certain people more than others.
Or isn't it because his works have been more enduring?
Well, I mean, his works have been more enduring partly because of the fact that England was the world power for so long. I mean, Shakespeare's works have been more enduring than a lot of English authors as well. And when you look at the history of things, I mean, you didn't have, if you talk about 500 years ago, 600 years ago, a lot of the places we're talking about, their stories were passed orally because they didn't necessarily have written text in that time. There's Nigerian stories that exist 500-600 years ago. The most enduring texts in the world are obviously religious texts. But I mean, of course, his work is enduring. But the question we're asking here is why his work is enduring. Why his work will endure another 1,000 years, and Andrew will still not know the name of a single African author.
But Femi, I understand that as somebody that studied English literature and language at university, the idea that the canon has been decided by predominantly white men over centuries. I'm with you. But what we talked about this morning is a whole generation of young people in this country who have no pride in this country, and they're being taught to be ashamed of our Britishness, and we somehow have to get that balance right. Rafe.
I'm not being taught to be ashamed.
Hang on. Let me just bring Rafe. Hang on, Femi. Let me bring Rafe Heydel-Mankoo on. Rafe, I know where Femi's coming from when he's saying that the balance has been, that we have to somehow taper the success of Shakespeare because of the harms of colonialism. But we're also losing sight of the fact that he was a brilliant writer, and there's something to be celebrated there.
Yes, absolutely. Look, Shakespeare is a global phenomenon because he speaks to his plays are universal, and they have timeless insights into the human character, and they deal with issues that are just as relevant today and enduring themes of, love, war, family squabbles, and everything else. And we know that because, you see, Shakespeare is a global phenomenon, even in places like China and Japan, which have fiercely proud, patriotic populations and a great history of literature in their own right. India as well, the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, and so forth. But even they understand the universality of Shakespeare as the world's greatest writer. In fact, the Chinese asked this very same Shakespeare Birthplace Trust for permission to rebuild Shakespeare's home in China using Elizabethan techniques. They have national festivals about Shakespeare in Japan as well. And you had Kurosawa, the greatest director in Japan, doing Macbeth also. That's the universality over here. And the criticism that's being put out by this research, by the Trust and so forth, is that presenting Shakespeare as the world's greatest genius presents European culture as the world standard for high art. And I'm sorry, but Western culture is the standard for much high art. That's why so many Asians play European classical music, for example. Now, that wasn't the case when Shakespeare was alive. In the 16th century, Asia was the global powerhouse and cultural powerhouse. and Elizabethan England was a cultural backwater. But for the last 300 years, Europe and the West has stood head and shoulders above every other civilization. Femi mentions African authors. There are 2,000 languages in Africa, but as Femi's pointed out, most of those were oral. 80% of African languages don't have a written tradition, so they weren't capable of producing a Shakespeare. The most profound and sophisticated music, art, and culture has come from the West, and we need to lose the embarrassment and be proud to admit the genius of the West. Celebrate that Shakespeare was an Englishman, and that's what sticks in the craw of the anti-Western ideologues that run our cultural institutions, because they cannot stand that an Englishman is the greatest writer that the world has ever produced, and they will do anything to diminish and downplay that achievement.
Okay, all right.
May I just come back quickly?
And I've just thought of J.M.
10 seconds.
Did I not read J.M. Coetzee? He's an African author, isn't he, Femi?
Pardon?
J.M. Coetzee?
Okay, great. Well, I'm not familiar with their work, but
well, he won the Nobel Prize.
Possibly. Great. Now,
Brief,
if we
Femi, we're so close to the time, but can I just say, is there not space for both?
On the screen, we have, was Shakespeare a white supremacist? The Trust, from what I read in the Telegraph article that I was sent, no one has said Shakespeare was a white supremacist. So that is just kind of scaremongering. No one has said that. The Trust has said that celebrating and saying what Rafe has said here, that he's the greatest writer of all time, is linked to that, is linked to the idea of European supremacy. Rafe mentioned classical music, Western classical music. There's notes in Indian classical music that don't even exist in Western classical music. There's microtones that don't exist in Western classical music, in Indian and Arabic classical music. There's so much culture outside of the West, which the West doesn't want to necessarily recognize and appreciate, because if you do so, then you recognize that you're not superior to them. And that Shakespeare, being a great writer, not being a white supremacist, I've played Shakespeare professionally on stage. And no one has said which Shakespeare was a white supremacist. It's scaremongering to put on the screen, was Shakespeare a white supremacist, because no one has said this. However, you can also accept the possibility that there might also be other great artists, other great musicians, other great writers on Shakespeare's level.
And I think there is room
in other places.
There is room for both. But thank you, gentlemen, so much. Femi Nylander, who I would happily watch in Othello, I'd love to watch that, and historian Rafe Heydel-Mankoo. When this assessment was done on the Shakespeare location, guess what? They then secured funding from the Esme Fairbairn Foundation, an organisation that finances projects that boost diversity and inclusion.
I'm surprised he hasn't heard of J.M. Coetzee. I just checked. He won the Nobel Prize in 2003.
J.M. Coetzee, I think he's South African, isn't he?
What is African?
I think he's drawn a distinction between African countries and South African countries. But look, spokesperson for the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust issued the following statement in response to this story.
As part of our ongoing work, we've undertaken a project which explores our collections to ensure they're as accessible as possible.
So you see, capitulating, giving in, you might say, to a prism of diversity across every issue, even Shakespeare, living in a time when there were very few Black, Indian, Asian people, of course, living in Great Britain, a time before mass migration. Does it need to be contextualised through this 2025 prism of what you might call wokeness, other people would call the diversity, equity and inclusion ambition? I don't know. Let me know in the comments below. I love to hear from you. Give me a thumbs up if you like this video. Please subscribe to the GBN Originals news channel. I'm Bev Turner. I'll see you next time.